The year was 1944. Europe burned. Allied forces had stormed the beaches of Normandy, and the road to victory stretched through blood, chaos, and deception. But behind the thunder of tanks and the crack of rifles, another kind of war was being fought, one that used no bullets, no bombs, no brute force. It was a war of illusion, a war of imagination, and it was waged by artists. They were painters, sculptors, sound engineers, and fashion designers. Men who had once drawn on sketchpads, not battle maps. But now, they carried a different kind of weapon, deception. Their mission was simple, yet extraordinary, to fool the German army into believing what wasn't there. They were known only as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but history would remember them as the Ghost Army. It began in early 1944, months before D-Day. The Allies knew that brute force alone wouldn't win the war. The German army was smart, calculating, disciplined, and deadly. Every move the Allies made was watched, analyzed, anticipated. To outfight them, they would have to outthink them. So, in a hidden base in England, a strange group gathered. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. Some were from New York art schools. Others were sound technicians from Hollywood. One had designed women's lingerie before the war. Another had painted billboards in Times Square. Now, under military orders, they were to build a phantom army, complete with fake tanks, fake guns, fake radio chatter, fake camps, fake soldiers, everything needed to convince Hitler's generals that real divisions were moving where there were none. If the Germans believed the illusion, they would move their troops, reposition their defenses, leaving the real Allied forces free to strike elsewhere. It was, quite literally, a performance, on the grandest stage the world had ever known. By the summer of 1944, their first mission was ready. France had been invaded. The Allies were pushing east, but the Germans were regrouping. The Ghost Army's job was to draw enemy attention away from the real attacks, to make the Germans believe that entire divisions were massing in one location, when in truth, they were ghosts. At dawn, convoys began to roll out, but these were no ordinary convoys. From a distance, they looked formidable, long lines of Sherman tanks, armored trucks, artillery guns. But up close? They were rubber. Inflatable. Air-filled replicas designed by sculptors and painters, crafted so perfectly that even reconnaissance planes couldn't tell the difference. Soldiers of the Ghost Army, many barely 20 years old, inflated the tanks using air compressors, sometimes under the cover of night, their hands trembling as enemy patrols passed nearby. Within hours, an empty field could become a bustling base, complete with fake fuel depots, camouflage nets, and tire tracks painted into the mud. From the air, it looked real. On the ground, it was pure theater. But deception was not just visual, it was auditory. The US Army brought in engineers from Bell Labs to develop powerful speakers that could broadcast sounds for miles. They recorded the rumble of real tanks, the clatter of trucks, the shouted orders of soldiers, then played these recordings through forests and hills to mimic troop movements. If a German scout heard engines roaring at midnight, he would radio command, "American armor advancing." But in truth, there was nothing, only the echoes of art and illusion. Every sound, every flicker of light, every radio message was part of the act. To complete the illusion, the Ghost Army had another weapon, the airwaves. Using portable transmitters, they created fake radio traffic that mimicked real divisions. Messages were encrypted, coded, layered with just enough military jargon to sound authentic. Skilled radio operators copied the speech patterns of genuine divisions, even the personality quirks of known commanders. If German intelligence intercepted the chatter, they would be convinced an entire unit was on the move, exactly as planned. Their first major operation came after D-Day, during the drive across France. The Allies needed to cross the Seine River and push east, but German forces were massing nearby. So, the Ghost Army set to work. In a matter of days, they erected an entire fake division south of the real one. Rubber tanks lined the fields, canvas trucks filled the roads, fake artillery pointed at the horizon. Loudspeakers blasted the sounds of construction and armored engines through the night. When the Germans sent reconnaissance planes overhead, they saw what appeared to be a massive buildup of Allied forces. They repositioned accordingly, walking straight into the trap. The real army crossed the Seine almost unopposed. It was a victory won not by firepower, but by illusion. As the war moved deeper into Europe, the Ghost Army followed, always in the shadows, always unseen. Their most dangerous mission came in September 1944, near the town of Metz. The Germans were preparing a counterattack. If they broke through, they could split the Allied advance. The Ghost Army was ordered to hold their attention, alone. They moved into position, setting up 500 inflatable tanks, dozens of fake camps, and miles of imitation supply lines. They blasted engine noises, sent false radio signals, and even dressed in fake unit insignia to sell the deception. But this time, the enemy was close, dangerously close. German patrols came within 300 yards of their lines. One mistake, one deflated tank, one loose tongue, and the entire illusion would collapse. Under heavy rain and tension, they kept the performance alive. Soldiers joked nervously as they inflated rubber tanks by hand, whispering, "If this doesn't work, we're dead." It did work. The Germans took the bait, redirected their artillery, and the real Allied divisions broke through elsewhere. The Ghost Army had saved thousands of lives, without firing a shot. But not all missions were so smooth. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the situation turned desperate. The German counteroffensive was fierce. Snow covered the forests, visibility was low, and chaos reigned. The Ghost Army was ordered to simulate reinforcements where none existed, to bluff the Germans into believing the Allies were stronger than they were. The men set up their rubber tanks in freezing cold, their fingers numb, snow piling on the inflatable armor. The sound engineers worked around the clock, layering tank engines with the howls of the wind to mask their recordings. At night, they huddled in foxholes beside their fake tanks, listening to real artillery thunder miles away. They were artists pretending to be soldiers, but in those nights, they became both. Their illusion worked again. German commanders hesitated, delaying their attacks, giving the Allies crucial time to regroup. By 1945, the war was nearing its end. The Ghost Army had carried out over 20 major deceptions, moving across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany, each time risking exposure, each time saving lives through trickery. Their final mission came along the Rhine River, near the German town of Wesel. The objective: convince the Germans that the main Allied crossing would occur miles away from where it actually would. It was the ultimate act. Thousands of inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery lined the banks. Radios buzzed with fake chatter. Loudspeakers filled the night with the sounds of soldiers preparing to cross. Flares lit the skies. German spotters watched in panic, sending reinforcements toward the Phantom Army. Then, under cover of darkness, the real Allied forces crossed the Rhine miles away, completely unopposed. The deception had worked perfectly. A few days later, American generals met the Ghost Army and shook their hands. One general said quietly, "You saved tens of thousands of lives, and no one will ever know." He was right. For decades, the story of the Ghost Army was classified, hidden behind government files and military secrecy. The men returned home and went back to their lives, to painting, to design, to art. Some became famous artists. Others never spoke of what they had done. But among themselves, they remembered. They remembered nights spent inflating rubber tanks under enemy fire. They remembered carrying fake radios through real minefields. They remembered the laughter, the fear, and the strange pride of fighting a war with creativity instead of destruction. One veteran later said, "We were the strangest army that ever existed. We fought a war with paintbrushes and sound effects." When the files were finally declassified in the 1990s, historians were stunned. The Ghost Army's operations had saved countless Allied soldiers and shortened the war in Europe. Their illusions were so convincing that captured German officers later admitted they had been completely fooled, some even recalling reports of massive American divisions that, in truth, never existed. It was art as warfare, theater as strategy, imagination as weapon. Today, the legacy of the Ghost Army lives on, not in monuments or medals, but in the quiet admiration of those who understand what they did. They showed that war is not only about strength, but about intelligence, creativity, and the power of deception. As one of the last surviving members said before his death, "We weren't heroes. We were artists who happened to wear uniforms. But if a brushstroke or a sound effect could save a life, that was worth everything." The fields of Europe are quiet now. The inflatable tanks have long deflated. The radios are silent. The sketches are faded. But in the echoes of history, the Ghost Army still marches, invisible, ingenious, unforgettable. They fought not to destroy, but to deceive. Not to kill, but to protect. Not with violence, but with vision. And in doing so, they proved one simple truth. Sometimes, the greatest weapon in war is imagination.